So the most recent developer livestream for Diablo 4 has just concluded, and we got a massive amount of new information on upcoming patches. So that's what I want to go over in this video. And we actually got a ton of information on multiple different patches that are going to be released in different time periods. And this includes a pretty big patch that's going to be released before Season 1, a patch that's going to be released with Season 1, and a patch that's going to be released with Season 2. And Season 1 is being planned for mid to late July. So this first big patch is going to be some point before that time. And also any information we got that wasn't tied to any of these specific patch timings, I'm just going to throw into this first section. And one of the biggest pieces of information we got is some massive changes coming to Nightmare Dungeons. Now there's recently been a ton of balancing around dungeons. They've nerfed a bunch of dungeons that had way too many elites, and then they basically tried to equalize every single dungeon so they all had a similar amount of elites. But now they're basically doing the opposite, and they're starting to buff everything up. The first thing being that specifically for Nightmare Dungeons, you're just going to be getting increased experience from basically everything within these Nightmare Dungeons. So you kill enemies, you're going to be getting more XP than you would be getting right now. The main goal of this is to make Nightmare Dungeons more efficient than running normal dungeons, which is how Nightmare Dungeons should be. And there is a second massive change coming to Nightmare Dungeons somewhere down the road, in that sigils will also create a waypoint that allows you to teleport to that dungeon. So once you use a sigil and turn a dungeon into a Nightmare Dungeon, you would get a pop-up that lets you teleport to the entrance of that dungeon, removing the travel time of going to Nightmare Dungeons. And this is in an effort to make Nightmare Dungeons more efficient than normal dungeons, because just having to travel to every Nightmare Dungeon massively reduces the efficiency compared to just resetting normal dungeons. And they weren't very specific on when this sigil teleport change would be added in, but sometime in the future, that's going to be a massive change. And they also mentioned that at some point in the future, there's probably going to be a density increase to certain dungeons, or potentially to all dungeons. And this will be a result of their most recent rebalancing of all the dungeons. So they wanted to get them to a baseline to then buff them up later down the road. And then a smaller bug fix is the blighted corpse explosion is going to be fixed, so you can actually see things when this happens. If you don't know what this is, Necromancer has an effect that causes their corpse explosion to put this big shadow effect on the ground. And if you stack this up, it basically turns everything inside of it invisible. You legitimately can't see anything. So that's a massive fix, because if you played with a Necromancer that had this, it completely affected you as well. And then we're also going to be getting increased material caps. So if you don't know right now, basically all the materials in your material tab has a cap of 9,999. This is going to be increased, but I'm not sure to the extent that they're going to be increasing this. Most likely by quite a bit, because there have been some very hardcore players capping a lot of these materials. And then for a much bigger change that we're getting somewhere down the road, probably sometime after Season 2, is that they're making some pretty big changes to resistances. Because if you haven't heard, you haven't seen a bunch of the videos going over this, people have basically discovered that resistances are the worst defensive stat to go for. They're just not scaling as much as basically any of the other damage reductions or armors. And right now, resistances are much less valuable than the developers wanted, and they're dropping off much more once you get into higher difficulties than they originally planned. So somewhere down the road, they're going to be redoing this system and basically buffing up resistances across the board to make them much more valuable. And it sounds like they want people going for resistances more than most of the other defensive stats. But again, this sounds like something that would be after Season 2. And then they're planning on continuously fixing a lot of the hardcore bugs, because there's been a bunch of clips and videos of hardcore players dying to various different bugs, and they want to continuously fix these as quickly as possible. And then next up, they're going to be fixing the bug with world boss cash rewards requiring a higher level than you currently are. And I had this issue where when I was in my 70s, I had a handful of level 80 caches that I couldn't open. Now there is still the possibility of you getting higher level gear from these caches than you can currently wear, but you'll always be able to open these world boss caches now. And next up, they are fixing a bug with druids where you are getting a lot of barbarian unique weapons for some reason. And I main a druid, and I've gotten like 6 of the same barbarian unique weapons. Now this doesn't mean you'll never find unique items for other classes, because there's still a low chance that you can get pieces of gear for other classes, but they're fixing the bug where druids have been getting this at a much higher rate. And another one of the big things that we're talking about that doesn't really have a specific date is adding in more social features features somewhere down the road. So things like looking for a group or just making it easier for people to find groups or find other players to play with. There wasn't a specific date or any specifics, but this sounds like something that they want to continuously iterate on every new season. And another fix we're getting pretty soon is a bunch of fixes to PC performance specifically, because there's been a lot of issues on PC with a lot of stuttering and just a lot of performance issues. And presumably there's just going to be performance increases and performance bug fixes across every system. And likewise, they just mentioned a ton of general bug fixes. The document they were reading off of was like 13 pages long, so there's going to be tons of fixes across the entirety of the game. And they did also mention having the possibility of teleporting to players when not in town, so potentially just right-clicking a player and being able to teleport to them. Now, they said there's not currently plans for this, but it sounded like potentially in the future, if this is something a lot of players want, that they could potentially add this in. And next up, they mentioned some pretty big buffs to most of the classes in the game coming with this big patch before Season 1, because they mentioned that with a lot of the recent hotfixes, there's been nerfs to a lot of classes or a lot of items, and that coming up in this big patch, it's a time for buffs. So I'd probably expect buffs to probably every class and a lot of different items, trying to bring up a lot more builds to make them more viable. And answering one of the community questions, they said that they aren't going back to quarterly updates, which is something they've done since 2019, and instead they're going to be doing much more consistent developer live streams. And they also mentioned that in the coming weeks, they're also going to have a developer live stream specifically going over Season 1. And another thing they mentioned is that possibly in the future, there'll be ways to change more customization options for your character in the wardrobe, because right now you can't change your hair or hair color or a lot of other options that you could choose when you first made your character. They didn't give any time frame, but they said that they know this is something players want and something that they agree with. It's just something that is of a lower priority than a lot of other fixes or additions. And again, everything we just went over is either coming with a big patch before Season 1, or it's something that they didn't give a date or time period for. But then next up, we have Season 1 fixes. And to be very specific, there's going to be a lot more stuff within Season 1. There's obviously going to be all the new content. There's going to be more quality of life fixes, probably tons of bug fixes and balance changes. This is just some of the specific stuff that they mentioned would be with the Season 1 patch. First off, being a pretty big change on how Renown is going to fold over into seasons. The first part being that the Fog of War you unlock on the Eternal Realms is going to fold over into Season 1. So if on the Eternal Realms right now, you have completely removed any Fog of War from the map, you've explored everywhere. Once you start on the seasonal servers, all of your characters will be able to see everything on the map. There will be no Fog of War left, and on the seasonal servers, you will gain all of the renown you would have gained from unveiling all of that Fog of War. And when this change is released into Season 1, all of your alt characters on the Eternal Realms are also going to get this change as well. So once this is released, every new character you create on any realm is always going to have basically everything in the map already unlocked, and there won't be any Fog of War left. But specifically for waypoints, you will still have to go there and click on all the waypoints at least once. You will still have all the main cities unlocked, but all of the other waypoints you'll be able to see on the map, you'll still have to travel to them to unlock them. And likewise with Altars of Lilith, you will also be getting all of the renown points you would have gotten from unlocking all Altars of Lilith on the seasonal servers. And that's added on to the fact that once you unlock all the Altars of Lilith, you won't ever need to do it again. You will have all of those stats you got from the altars on the seasonal servers already. And what this actually means is if you've completed all of your renown on the Eternal Realms, once you start a new character on the Seasonal Realms, you will have the first 2 tiers of renown in every region completed, just from having all the Fog of War unlocked and just from claiming every Altar of Lilith. Basically meaning that we only have to do half of the renown system on our new seasonal characters. And they also did mention that they might end up changing renown in the future, depending on how Season 1 renown feels. And that's all the main information we got for what's coming with Season 1. But like mentioned, in the next couple weeks, we're going to be getting a live stream detailing all the new content and everything else coming with Season 1. Those are just some of the changes they wanted to tell us about early. So that brings us into Season 2. And the absolute biggest thing coming with the Season 2 patch is they're completely redoing how you earn gems. So once this change takes effect, gems won't be an item in your inventory that you pick up off the ground. Instead, you're going to be getting a new currency that goes into your currency tab. So this won't take up any inventory space. It'll just be in that currency tab like all ores, herbs, and all the other random resources you obtain. It'll go in that resource or currency tab. And then this new gem resource you'll take to an NPC, and then you'll craft the gems you want. And those gems you craft will be an inventory item, but this will just save you a massive amount of space in your inventory because you won't ever have to be picking up gems that are taking inventory space away from items you could be picking up. And then there's also going to be a pretty big change to hardcore characters with season 2, and this is specifically going to be targeting disconnection protection. And how this is going to work is if you have a scroll of escape on a hardcore character, which is a hardcore character specific rare drop item, and then you disconnect, that character will automatically use a scroll of escape and send you directly back to town. And the main reason for this change being disconnection protection, but adding it in a way that it can't be abused. Because if they allowed some DC protection that was triggerable and basically infinite, then people would just find a way to abuse it. So now it's going to actually use your scrolls of escape, but this could potentially save your character when you have a bad disconnect. And this next part isn't tied to any specific season, but the developer's general philosophy around seasons is that they are valuing adding new content into seasons over quality of life changes. But quality of life changes will still be a pretty big part of every new season. So basically the priority list of new seasons is going to be adding in new content at number 1, and then quality of life changes at number 2. But that's all the major information we got from this most recent developer livestream. And this is just a section of the changes coming because, like mentioned, the developers had a over 13-page document with all the changes they're currently working on. This is just some of the bigger issues that have been being talked about by a lot of the community, and there are some massive changes that are just going to be big pluses for the game in general. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.